Hi, this is Gabe from MotoringFile, and I'm on day 7 with the all-new MINI Countryman S. I have driven this car, not this car, but the Countryman S all over the world. I've tested the JCW, the S model, of course, and the new SE, the electric version. But they've always been in little bits, little sort of snippets, you know, day here, day there. This is the first time I've really lived with the car, and I think that's what's so interesting about this experience. I have done everything. I've commuted in it. I've had kids in the back, dogs in the back, highways, tried to find curvy roads in Chicago, just lived with it. And I think it's been really, really cool to get to know this car at a level of depth that a typical road tester would just not be able to have. And I think also really cool to then compare it to my own car, which is the Clubman JCW. And now I know there's a ton of differences there. I mean, the Clubman is a little bit smaller of a car, it's a lower center of gravity, and of course the JCW is a much faster car. It's a car that is ultimately the highest performance version of, you know, any Mini model. And that's not what this is. But this whole notion of a comparison isn't necessarily to say what's faster or what's more extreme. It's just the little things. And so, for instance, you get in this car right away and you feel a clear difference in the steering. The steering is lighter, there's no question about it, but it's also a little bit more linear in the way it builds feedback, and I think ultimately feels more natural, which, you know, one of the critiques we've had of Minis for the past 10 years is that, you know, ultimately the feedback I was trying to deliver, which wasn't necessarily the most genuine, didn't feel natural. It would build in sort of artificial feeling ways. This is better at that. It's also quicker steering rack, so it's a sort of a quicker turn, if you will. So how does that compare? It'll be interesting. A couple other things. The DCT transmission is a big improvement, and for what people use this car for, this is way better. I mean, it just is. I mean, you know, when we think about the city driving, the commutes, it's just an infinitely more comfortable experience. It is, I would say, not as fast at shifting as the Ace and 8-speed, but it's almost as fast. It's much more comfortable. And when you put it in sport mode and you put it in sort of the transmission secret sport mode low, where you used to get this sort of jerkiness with the previous transmission, this is just utterly smooth. It feels how you'd want it to feel, a little bit quicker throttle response, hangs on the gears a little bit longer. It's exactly what you want. So, you know, it's interesting to feel these differences, and there's been some clear change in some of the engineering concepts, and the small things as well. I mean, the sun visor, you know, in North America, we'd always have a sun visor on the left-hand side of the driver. That's gone now. Well, this has gotten bigger, and, you know, theoretically, many thought, well, there's no real need for it anymore to be over here. Is that the case? I think it probably is in 95% of use cases fine. It has definitely gotten bigger, and it works in 95% of use cases. I'm sure there'll be some folks who will find it inadequate. And then, of course, there's other things. The digital experience is infinitely more powerful, but it's also more complex. I prefer it, but I tend to just enjoy those sort of things. There's other things we won't talk about. Yes, there's no paddle shifters anymore in this car. They'll come back, and of course they're on the JCW, and there's some other differences we'll talk about in a bit. But in general, we wanted to do this comparison and talk about the Countryman S first. We talk about this new car first, and then go back in time and actually sit and get to know this Clubman JCW, which I think in a lot of ways is, for me, the pinnacle of the F54, F60 generation of cars. How do they compare? What have we lost, but also what have we gained with this new car? So with all that said, let's hop out of our U25 Mini Countryman and hop in the F54 JCW Clubman. All right, so hopped out of the U25 Mini Countryman and hopped in the 2024 Clubman JCW. This is my own car, so I know it pretty well. But having spent 7 days in that new Countryman S and then back in this car, wow, some big differences. And I think it's worth calling them out, just a few, because I think, you know, the ones that are different are quite different. For one, I kind of talked about this earlier, kind of sort of seeded this idea, but the steering is quite a bit different. This is heavier, quite a bit heavier than the new car. It's a slower rack, and so it's quite literally more turns to lock. So what does that mean? Well, you know, it makes the new car feel like it's a quicker turn-in. You know, I think theoretically it's quicker in that you turn the wheel less to get where you want to go, but it's not necessarily quicker in terms of what's actually doing. I've mentioned this before, the feedback in the new car feels a little bit more linear, a little bit more natural, and I think that's right. I think it builds more progressively. I think this car has especially in sport mode, it has a heavier steering, dialed in. It's all digital. And I think that kind of fools people into thinking that it's feedback or it's better. It's not. In a lot of ways, I actually prefer the standard setting than the previous generation cars, but that's beside the point. This car is heavier for sure, but I think it's interesting. I mean, it's not like there's less feel here per se. It just doesn't feel as natural. So worth noting on that. Some other changes, and you know, again, there's a lot here. And I think one thing that's really interesting to me is there's a different relationship between the seat. It's not going to sound obvious, but between the seat, the steering wheel, the windows and everything, and the Clubman and the previous generation F60 Countryman. It's a bigger car, and you know, in a lot of ways, and that's okay, of course. But it's a bigger car, and I think because of that, it just does not, you sit higher up on the seat versus in the seat, like the previous cars, and especially like the Clubman. Of course, I'm a little Clubman biased. I love it. It's a great vehicle. It's a wagon, right? It's a car that I think didn't sell well because of the fact it's a wagon, but I love it. But it's natural. The Clubman's natural sort of superpower is because of its weight is much further down low. You know, it handles better. You know, it's a little bit lighter for sure, but it just simply handles better while still having almost the same sort of interior volume as the Countryman, at least the previous generation. Okay, a couple other things. The transmission, as also I mentioned, it feels almost antiquated at times, but it's also more raw, which is kind of fun, and I'm not going to do it now because I'm in a residential area, but I can rip off shifts in this thing, and it sounds, let's just say, it sounds more convincingly real than the new car, which does sound, it sounds like I have, a couple subwoofers underneath the seat sounding off and letting me know a shift has happened, even though they have no connection to the actual transmission. In this car, it feels like, or it sounds like something's actually happening. Now, there's also subwoofers under this seat and that seat, and it is also somewhat fake, but it sounds somehow closer to the real thing. But in general, it feels more raw because I'm feeling the shifts more. They're more defined shift to one gear to two versus the DCT, which of course grabs the second gear and seamlessly swaps over with two clutches. So not surprisingly, but it's interesting to sort of consider that. It is different. And gosh, I mean, I like the new car better in terms of the comfort. I do wish, and this is getting ahead of myself a little bit, in the JCW version of the new Countryman, that it shifted as quickly as this car. That the paddles and the way you shifted with the paddles, it was as responsive as well, which I think it, I hate to say it, I don't think it is as often, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, other things, like I mentioned earlier, this is a small little sun visor. The new one is much larger, and it's true, it does cover a lot more of the window. The infotainment system, I hate to say it, it feels antiquated. It feels small. Is it unusable? Does it feel old? It doesn't necessarily feel old. It's easy to use. There's no problems, but it is definitely, stepping back in time a little bit coming from the new car, which I thought Mini did a really, really good job with. So, like I said, rapid fire thoughts here. I think that, I think in general, what we have with the new car is one that is designed to appeal to a much broader audience while still retaining as much of the Mini characteristics as it can. And that's not damning by faint praise. I think most people will be happier with that car. And in JCW, trim, I think it is going to feel great for those people who are more enthusiast oriented. So they've kind of widened the gap to a degree between the S and the standard C and of course the JCW. And I think the previous generation was just a little closer to the dynamic quality that the hardtop has. So again, I mean, not to damn anything with faint praise. I think it was a move that Mini did very purposefully, and I think one of the nice things about that platform, that new Countryman platform, is they can dial in certain characteristics as they need to, as they want to. But the underlying technology, the underlying tech, I think there's no way around it. It's better for a daily driver. It's better for the majority of people out there, and I think they did a fantastic job with the new car. That said, this is my car. I'm very happy with it. I would not give it up. Not yet, at least. This is Gabe from MotoringFile. As always, check back for more videos. We've got more coming. If you like this one, give us a like and subscribe. We'll see you soon.